Joining me now by phone from Rio de Janeiro is Guardian columnist Glenn Greenwald, who broke many of the exclusives that Snowden was able to provide with the documents that he took from the NSA and has worked closely with him. Glenn Greenwald, good morning.
Good morning, Howard.
You've said to me and in other interviews that this isn't ultimately about Ed Snowden. It's about the surveillance state and the magnitude of U.S. surveillance that he exposed. But by going to Moscow, and I understand that it's probably not his final destination, isn't there a very real chance now that the media, some elements of which have been sympathetic to Snowden, are going to turn more hostile?
I think that's true, although I hope it isn't. I mean, he's a human being. He's 29 years old. He just turned 30. He's obviously trying to avoid being put in prison for the rest of his life for something that he believes firmly was his right to do as an American. But I hope the media will continue to focus on the much bigger issue, which is what has the U.S. government been doing in the dark in building this massive spying apparatus, and how has it been lying to the American people about what it's been doing when answering questions from their representatives in Congress.
That is an important part of the story, and yes, we can all understand, Glenn, somebody trying to stay out of prison for the rest of his life. But this is a guy who you have gotten to know quite a bit, who knowingly broke the law, who seemed at first like he was prepared to face the consequences. After all, he went public. You didn't reveal his identity. He revealed his own identity. And now, by going first to Hong Kong, now to Moscow, next we don't know where, doesn't it look like he's just trying to save his own skin?
Well, let's be clear. I mean, he's going to be facing serious consequences no matter what happens. He had a life in which he was living in the United States as an American citizen his whole life. He had a long-term girlfriend in Hawaii, a stable, lucrative career, all of which he gave up in order to bring to light what he believed is serious wrongdoing on the part of our highest political officials. And he's now, no matter what, at best going to spend the rest of his life on the run from the most powerful government on earth. So there's going to be very serious consequences to him either way. But as McClatchy this morning just reported, the Obama administration has been unprecedentedly aggressive and vindictive when it comes to punishing whistleblowers, and he knows that that's the political climate that he faces if he comes back to the United States, and I think it's entirely understandable why he doesn't want to do that.
But when Snowden tells the South China Morning Post, for a story published today, that the U.S. has hacked Chinese mobile companies and a top Beijing university, he begins to be painted as somebody who, fairly or unfairly, he begins to be painted as somebody who's out to hurt America.
All I can tell you is I know that he has in his possession thousands of documents which, if published, would impose crippling damage on the United States' surveillance capabilities and systems around the world. He has never done any of that. He could, if his goal were to harm the United States, there were all sorts of things he could have done, from uploading those documents on the internet to selling them to a foreign intelligence service. He instead came to two newspapers, leading with ours, and said, I have a lot of documents that I think the public should know. Please carefully vet them and publish only what the public should know without harming national security. That has clearly been his goal from the start, and we've honored those wishes.
My time is short. I have to ask you whether you're concerned if public opinion and the media environment turns against Ed Snowden, whether you, as somebody who's worked closely with him, will be tarred almost as a kind of co-conspirator.
Well, the Obama administration has flirted with that theory with other reporters. David Gregory all but endorsed it when I did an interview with him earlier on Meet the Press. So, sure, it's an issue, but it's not going to constrain me or deter me in any way. I believe in the First Amendment and the freedom of the press guarantee in it. All
right, I need a brief answer. Do you know, and of course, can you tell us where Ed Snowden is ultimately headed?
I'm not going to, he's my source, so I just can't talk about what his intentions are with regard to where he's going.
All right, I guess we'll have to find out for ourselves as we see the events unfold. Glenn Greenwald, thanks very much for checking in by phone.
Thank you, Howard.
And our panel rejoins us now, and David Zurich, you heard Glenn Greenwald defend his source and talk about how he is doing what he sees as the right thing, but at the same time doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. But that, I think, is going to be the question being asked by those of us in the media, which is, if this is an act of conscience and he comes forward, doesn't he undermine his own case by turning himself into an international fugitive?
Well, Howie, yes, but I'm so glad Greenwald's voice has been added to this, because some would say, oh, he's somewhat self-aggrandizing and he's put himself in the middle of this narrative and now it's an irresistible narrative. But even what Greenwald said reminds us, this is a guy who's just turned 30, who's in the middle of this thing, who maybe also looks like a guy who just doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail. And this administration is holding nothing back in punishing anybody who leaks any kind of information. Another thing with Greenwald that I'm so glad we heard, let's not forget what this administration has been doing, trying to criminalize the press getting information, Howie.
I agree that that's a very important story that we've talked about in the context of the subpoenas for the AP and James Rosen of Fox News. But right now we have the Justice Department really having no choice other than to go after somebody who worked with the NSA as a contractor, who took a lot of classified documents out of there, whether espionage charges are warranted or not. I'll leave for the lawyers to decide. But Emily Bell, since you work for The Guardian and know the British media culture quite well, is there any danger now if, again, public opinion and media commentary turns against Snowden, that The Guardian will be tainted in a way, for working so closely with somebody who's now seen as an unsympathetic character?
No, I think The Guardian's focus has been all along, as Glenn was saying, on the importance of the stories and shedding light on surveillance techniques. It's really, you know, that's the interest of the brand. That's the interest of the US edition, which is based here. And really, the vast majority of the coverage, you know, you're picking out bits of the filmed interview and the Q&A, but the vast majority of the Guardian's coverage has actually been about the surveillance programs themselves, their legality, and what the consequences there are. Right. And I think that's a pretty clear line. Let
me get a final word from Amy Holmes on whether the story will now focus on what Ed Snowden revealed or this global chase that is almost seems like a made-for-TV movie.
I agree that having Glenn Greenwald's voice in this, I think, was important to, you know, refocus on the NSA wiretapping, phone record logging aspect of this case. But I think it's inevitable that by sort of going on the run, that the story is going to be about Ed Snowden, his, you know, his character, his motivation, this international chase. Where is he now? It's probably going to turn into, like, you know, where's Waldo at this point when it comes to Ed Snowden.
We've had Greenwald on this program for 3 straight weeks now, so his voice has certainly been part of our media discussion. Emily Bell in New York, David Zurich, Amy Holmes, thanks for coming by this Sunday morning.